Hello, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt. Welcome to AppTV's Religion and Life. This week we explore religion in yoga. Yes, yoga. It's a lot more than a form of exercise. Our guest is Valerie Midget of Neighborhood Yoga right here in Boone. Welcome, Valerie.
Thanks, Ozzie.
It's very easy in our culture, in our society, to see yoga everywhere. We see it in shopping malls, in gyms, fitness studios, and whatnot, so that we conclude often that yoga is just another form of exercise. But it's really so much more than that. So I want to start just by asking you to, if you would, tell us what yoga is in the larger sense, beyond just the physical exercise.
So yoga comes from a Sanskrit word, and the word is yang, Y-U-J, and that word means to yoke. We translate it often as to unite. So that's the traditional meaning of yoga, and that's interpreted in many different ways. It can mean often to unite body and mind, body, mind, spirit, often done through the breath. The breath is very often that connection of our body and mind. And to unite us with ourselves on a deeper level, to unite us with others, and to unite us with something greater than ourselves.
So when we think of yoga simply as a physical pursuit, we're really missing the boat entirely, unless you think in larger terms of the spirituality that underlies what's going on physically.
Well, it depends on what you want from yoga, because it has a lot to offer. And so it just depends on what intentions you're coming to yoga with. And in the West, we look at yoga very differently than they do in the East, where it originated. So in the West, when we think of the term yoga, we really think of a lot of these physical postures. Sometimes they look like pretzels. A lot of people have images of now what yoga looks like.
Right.
But really, when we're calling that yoga, really that's asana. That's the physical practice of yoga. But there's so much more. And when you look at yoga in its totality, the physical practice is actually a very small part of yoga in its greatest sense. But it's the part that we focus here on the West.
And you might need to give me a little history lesson here, but actually yoga comes out of the most ancient of our world religions, I think. Is that correct? Out of Hinduism, originated in India.
Exactly.
So it has this long history of connection with the oldest recognized world religion and the tradition of spirituality that comes out of yoga.
Exactly. And yoga came out of India. Dates back 5,000 years ago.
That's
so
incredible.
I feel like it took 5,000 years to hit pop culture in the West.
Right.
So I don't think yoga's going anywhere anytime soon. I don't know that it will be in pop culture forever. It's kind of a strange phenomenon right now, but it came from India. And it was based out of the Hindu religion. And many of its teachings and many of its philosophies were adapted from Hinduism.
And I believe there's also a connection to Buddhism. Buddhism developed out of Hinduism. Is yoga also practiced within the Buddhist tradition?
Well, to tell you the truth, yoga is practiced in every tradition.
Okay.
But some of the teachings that come that are taught through yoga come out of the Buddhist traditions as well as the Hindu traditions. And you'll often see when you go into a yoga studio, you might see some Hindu deities represented in that studio, and you might see some Buddhist representations of Buddha as well. And one thing that I've found that in general, the public seems to maybe sometimes have a little bit of an easier time recognizing images of Buddha as maybe a form of compassion from the Buddhist religion. And some of the Hindu deities that are represented are a little more foreign to them, and sometimes maybe can even be a little intimidating.
Well, in fact, we have some images here we might want to look at to illustrate that, which I think help to capture this sort of spiritual grounding and religious grounding of yoga in Hinduism. So maybe you want to comment on this first image here. You mentioned that some of the deities or images in Hinduism are foreign. So what's going on here in this image?
So this is an image of Ganesh.
Ganesh.
And Ganesh is one of the thousands of Hindu deities. There's literally thousands. And he has a boy's body and an elephant's head. And there's a very kind of fantastical story around how this occurs. But less about the story and more about what it is that Ganesh represents. And he's known in India. And
We have our own Ganesh
you'll see
right
Ganesh
here. Yeah.
all over India.
Yeah.
And because he's known as the remover of obstacles and also guardian of the threshold. So when you're in India, you'll see little Ganeshes on the dashboard of all of the cars, all of the taxi drivers. Sometimes that's like in lieu of an actual insurance policy.
Oh, really?
But they'll have Ganesh, or they might have some other Hindu deity, might have a
Right.
picture of Shiva
And this,
on their dashboard. But it's more about what this represents. And Ganesh is someone that's often evoked whenever you're beginning anything new, because he's the guardian of the threshold. It helps you support you as you move through the threshold into another experience. Also, he represents the first chakra, which is the Muladhara chakra, and it's a sense of groundedness. It's a sense of stability. It's a sense of meeting our basic needs. And at the same time we experience that sense of groundedness, he has this capacity of being very open-heartedness.
okay. And you mentioned Ganesh being the gatekeeper, I think, or the one who allows transitions. I think
Yeah.
this particular image was taken as you were dedicating your new yoga studio. Is that
Right.
correct?
This
So-
particular Ganesh is all marble, and he sits just about a block away.
Okay.
Believe it or not, on the top floor of Farmers Hardware. And who would have known, a 100-year-old building? Now Ganesh lives up there.
Yeah.
And the studio is moving into this new space. And we had a teacher from India that was visiting us. So we did a puja in the space. And a puja is a ritual, an offering. And it involves offering prayers, offering fruit, offering flowers, offering music. And it's a way that kind of blesses a new space and a new beginning.
Right. That's very nice. I must confess, I've been to some yoga classes. I've never seen Ganesh there. Maybe the next time if I come to one of your classes.
You'll see Ganesh.
I'll see Ganesh. So let's take a look at this second image, which I think is really a beautiful picture. And you recognize this. You may not recognize what's going on, but I think most people would recognize this as a kind of reverential, spiritual experience of some sort. Would you comment just briefly on what we see here, perhaps?
Sure. So this is another puja, which is a ceremony, an offering. There's a lot of ritual that's involved within puja. And this is at our studio during an event called Diwali. Diwali, which is a Hindu, it's known as the Festival of the Lights.
Okay.
So it's celebrated all over the world, and this was our celebration here in Boone at our studio, and 100 people showed up for this. And it is it's celebrated as the Hindu New Year, and so when you go to India, everything is covered in lights.
Oh, that's
everything.
beautiful.
So that's the reason for the candlelight, and it's also an offering to the deity Lakshmi. And Lakshmi is known as the goddess of abundance and prosperity in the new year. And that's not just a physical, material form of abundance, but abundant health, maybe abundant spiritual wealth as well.
So far we've seen two images which are symbolic or ritualistic,
Right.
and we recognize those as kind of religious observances. This third image, or third photo, moves us a little bit more toward the physical aspects of yoga, but I still think retains a little bit of the religious imagery. And here you have a student striking a particular pose, which again, I don't know exactly what this means in terms of its Hindu ritual, but it strikes me as a recognizable type of religious or spiritual pose. Would you comment on,
Sure.
on this pose?
I love seeing that image, and,
Yeah.
and I love seeing those two people. We're in our teacher training. That was probably maybe 2 years ago now. We offer a training here every year. And the first weekend that we're together, we do a series of sun salutations, which are called Surya Namaskar, or salutes to the sun, Surya. And we do 108. So that picture is taken somewhere in the middle of 108.
So that's like 52 or 3 or so. Okay.
I don't know which one that is. But you can see, I see Andrew in the back, and he's in this very, like, you could pause at any time. And he's in this just kind of gesture of receiving, of being very open and receiving. And Anna in the front has her hands together in a gesture which is called, sometimes we'll refer to this as prayer position, but it's really a hand mudra. And this particular hand mudra is called Anjali mudra, and it's a mudra of offering. And a mudra is typically a hand gesture, and it's a gesture, it's more than just like a decorative, like you'll see a mudra, this is Jnana mudra,
right.
A mudra of knowledge. You see the Buddha depicting knowledge, of receptivity, of clarity. This is of offering.
Okay.
And mudras can also kind of connect us with a higher level of consciousness. It completes this circuit of energy in the body and connects us with this higher level of consciousness. So as people are moving deeper into their practice, we'll often see hands coming together and just honoring this sense of being open and offering to something greater than our individual self. We're practicing here, and even though we're moving deep into our own practice, we're sharing that with the community.
Well, it's very interesting, I think, that you describe this hand gesture in that way, opening ourselves to a higher consciousness. Many of our viewers in this area, at least, would be Christian, and they may not be aware of Hindu practice, but they would also recognize
Absolutely.
A hand gesture like this as opening themselves to a higher consciousness.
And very often, people might be hesitant to do that because they're thinking, am I offering myself to Ganesh? Who am I offering to, right? And I always tell people that whatever your religious beliefs are, whatever your faith is, whatever your spiritual beliefs might be, yoga only deepens that practice because it deepens our connection with ourselves, with our connection with each other, and something greater than ourselves.
Well, that really brings me to another point I'd like to ask you about. So far we've talked about the roots of yoga, deeply embedded within Hinduism, spilling over into Buddhism, and in fact into every religion. But I think you said it earlier that it took 5,000 years for the practice of yoga to make it to pop culture. So what I have noticed, and I think what we see in today's society, is that this mainstreaming of yoga, right? So we might see yoga being practiced, yet be unaware of this very important spiritual and religious grounding. Or we might see, I've seen hot yoga classes, I'm not sure what that is, or yoga on paddle boards. Or even you do that, okay. Or even Christian yoga, right? So, and I think that's for people who might be afraid of exactly what they're praying to. But could you comment a little bit on the mainstreaming of yoga? And I guess my question is this: if you remove the Hindu roots from yoga, is it still yoga? Right, or does it become something else? What happens in this?
So that's a lot there, and I'm going to try to stay focused on that. So if you remove the Hindu roots from yoga and the philosophy and that is behind all of that, you're not doing yoga in its fullest picture, but you could still be doing asana. And asana is one small part of yoga, and it's the part that we focus here on the West, and that's the physical practice of yoga. And very often, asana is the gateway in for many people because we find it very accessible in our society. People come, they start taking yoga classes, they start feeling better, they have more ease of movement, they're breathing better, they have a clarity of focus, they're not as stressed out. They start feeling these benefits of yoga from just purely from the physical practice. And then there's this mind-body connection, so they get a sense of clarity, a little bit less stress. And then you can hold the practice right there and receive all those benefits for a lifetime. If you want to take it deeper into the practice of yoga in its fullest picture, then I see people asking more questions, diving deeper into the history and the roots of yoga, into the philosophy of yoga, into some of the other paths of yoga beyond the physical path.
Okay, so maybe I should get my terminology straight then. So oftentimes when we refer to yoga, you're going to take a yoga class, really we're talking asana,
Right.
which is the physical manifestation.
I would say yes. In most places that's the case. If you go to a gym, if you go to a recreation center, you're taking an asana class, but we call it yoga.
Right.
And most of those include maybe a little bit of meditation, maybe a little bit of breathing, some of the physical practice. The focus is on the physical practice, 95% of the class.
Right.
And then there's usually a relaxation at the end, which is called shavasana.
My favorite part
Yes,
of the yoga.
that's what brings everybody
Right.
back. Shavasana brings
Shavasana.
everybody back.
Okay.
I always thought I should name a yoga class Countdown to Shavasana.
That's good.
Because everybody's thinking, when are we getting to Shavasana? But so I'm going to not say most, but a lot of studios that you go to or places that you might take yoga, like a rec center, or even various places are offering yoga now. Even I saw in the Charlotte paper, yoga at the brewery.
Yes.
200 people showed up for this yoga class at the brewery. And the brewery loves it. It's bringing men to yoga and it's bringing women to the brewery.
Okay.
Right? And they're practicing yoga, but with the focus on asana.
Well,
Right?
let's look at these next images since
Yeah.
you mentioned this
Okay.
differentiation, and it's easy. I think it's easier to focus on asana or the physical practice. If we
Right.
look at a few poses, and here's for an example, a picture of you working with a student,
Right.
and probably everybody. This may be the first yoga pose anyone learns, right?
This is downward facing dog.
Downward facing dog. So here we go, and this is takes some physical discipline. I can attest to that. Yet there's and it may be just that, but then there is this deeper understanding as well.
Right. So downward dog could just be downward facing dog. It could be physically, it opens the back of the hamstrings, it opens the lower back, it builds some strength in the arms and shoulders. But then there's a lot more, and you can take it and leave it at that and receive the benefits from that. But at the same time, any pose, you can move beyond that. You can talk just about the alignment or the pose, or you can talk about how in the pose we come up against resistance. And then what do? Do we back off? Do we breathe? Can we move through that resistance? And then where does that take us? And how can that relate to stilling of our mind from this constant mind chatter that happens? Right? And then from there, we can take that off the mat into our daily lives.
Well, that's great. Well, let's look at this this next photograph. Again, I think from your studio here, we'll illustrate some of the physical postures involved. I think this is really a beautiful image. Again, and this is the same hand gesture that you were talking about earlier, but here we see it as if you were making an offering to one another, and you had mentioned the community aspect of that. Am I looking at that correctly? Is that similar?
You are.
What's going on there?
So this is Anjali Mudra, and we are, and Anjali Mudra is often done at the same time that we might acknowledge, particularly at the end of the class, a word that we say is namaste, right?
Namaste.
Namaste. And you really only see it in yoga classes here in the States, but in India, it's everywhere. You're walking down the street and people are saying namaste.
So it's a greeting.
Namaste. It's a greeting. And it means so much more than here in the States we say, hey, how's it going, right? This just shows you how the spiritual life is infiltrated in every aspect of life in India. So they're not saying, hey, how's it going, right? They're saying namaste, which translates as the divine or the light or the God that's inside of me sees and recognizes that divine that's inside of you.
That's such a beautiful greeting with the strong spiritual religious connection.
And we look somebody in the eye when we say that. And at the same time, you'll see in that photo, we have our hands at what's called Anahata chakra, and that's the fourth chakra, the chakra at the heart. So it's like opening that space of the heart, right? And if you open Anjali Mudra, it comes to Padma Mudra, which is the symbol of the lotus flower.
Yeah.
And you can draw that into the heart, and it opens the space of your heart.
The lotus flower is a beautiful symbol as well. Let's look at this last image, if you would. Again, an example of a pose from your studio, I think. And is sun salutation of some sort? Or
so the sun salutation is actually a series of 12 postures. And so this is one of the postures within the sun salutation series. And it's a variation of Warrior 2. And this is called Peaceful Warrior.
Okay, Peaceful Warrior.
Yeah.
That's maybe not an image that we would recognize in the West, the Peaceful Warrior, or a symbol that we would resonate with.
Probably
readily.
not, right? So there's this kind of warrior intensity and the passion of a warrior, but at the same time, that's matched with a sense of compassion.
That's very nice. All right, so I have to ask you this. I've been to a few yoga classes. I enjoy it very much. In every class I've been to, I've been, well, generally the only male in the class. I think maybe on one or two occasions there's been one other male in the class with me. Is this common? Does this tend to be a gender-specific practice here in the West, that you have more women in your classes?
I like to think not. It's maybe more common in Boone, but in larger cities, often there's probably a more equal mix of men and women, maybe more like 40-60. Not 95 to 5%, right?
Right.
But it's funny because in the East, yoga was traditionally only taught to men, by men, of the upper class, one-on-one, from guru to disciple. We don't really have that type of relationship here in the States. We have one teacher and we're teaching to the masses very often. And it's been a practice that's really drawn women in to the practice. And I think sometimes there's some stereotypes about that, but to tell you the truth, men, and I don't know about your experience, but it probably wasn't easy.
It wasn't easy.
It wasn't easy. And there are different forms of yoga, and there's gentle yoga. It's just different styles of yoga.
Right.
These aren't paths. These are just different styles. And some styles are more vigorous. Some styles are more therapeutic. But all of them are meant to create a sense of ease in the body. Right? Yoga's not about, one of my favorite quotes from one of my teacher's teachers, who is Swami Satchidananda, says that yoga's not about how strong or how flexible you are. It's about an easeful body, a peaceful mind, and a useful life.
So it's a practice that can be adapted to anybody at any stage.
Anybody at any time.
I have to tell you, when I take yoga classes, I was reared on competitive sports, so I have to keep reminding myself that it's not a competition, that I have to find a place that I'm comfortable, right, in the poses. And I think that's something that's different about yoga when you look at it simply as a physical activity.
And I teach a lot of athletes. I go out to runners camps and teach runners too, and they have a very competitive spirit about them, and I always remind them that there's a lot of similarities in sports, and particularly running and yoga, because both of them can be considered moving meditations, right? But there's also this non-competitive attitude in yoga. And for most people, non-competitive, not only with each other, but with themselves. They get very competitive. The idea is an easeful attitude, not a competitive attitude.
Okay. Takes a reorientation of the mind for some of us. So I want to ask you kind of one last question here. We were talking earlier about your trips to India. I know you've had 2 or 3 trips.
Right.
And you were mentioning that in India, where people are living in poverty, a great portion of the population living in poverty, that yoga is ever-present, omnipresent, that it's integrated into life in a very special way. Could you comment just a little bit on that, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, here in the States, you know, we often go to yoga class, and then we live the rest of our life. Right? Or we go to asana class, and then we live the rest of our life. Hopefully, we're pulling what we learned from that class and that sense of ease and peacefulness out into the rest of our lives, so we don't get on the road and get into road rage on the way home from yoga class. But it's often separated. And in India, it's so infiltrated in every aspect of their life. And it's not just, it's rarely the physical practice of yoga that you see there. When we went to India, and I took a group of 15 people from Boone to India, and we were the only ones doing asana. We did asana all along the way, but we never saw any other people from India doing asana, but everybody was doing yoga. Everybody's saying namaste.
Sense.
Everybody's offering puja everywhere. Everybody's carrying around pictures of deities. And we particularly traveled along holy cities along the Ganga. And we studied and practiced rituals that are based, water rituals that are based around the Ganga.
Well, it's in my work as a student of religious traditions, we often talk about sacred cultures and sacred societies where religion is much more a part, or spirituality is a much more part of everyday life. And I think that beautifully describes what is going on in India with everyone practicing yoga all the time. So the next time now, I will remember our chat the next time I take an asana class, right? Not a yoga class. I really thank you for coming on today. This has been very educational, very insightful. And if I may, I'd like to say goodbye by offering namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's Religion and Life for this week. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions, you may contact us at watchapptv.com. Until next time, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt.